Hi guys, welcome back to another week of Art Life. In this week's episode, we're doing an art lesson for beginners oil painting. So even if you've never painted with oil before, this lesson is going to be perfect for you. Whether or not you are an established artist or just a beginner, everybody I think needs sometimes just someone to walk them through a step-by-step process of oil painting, because it's a very tricky medium. And I myself learnt with a teacher standing over me, walking me through the steps. And I do think copying something is how you learn, because it takes away the pressure of having to invent as well as explore the sort of technical skills of oil painting. So this lesson is mainly going to focus on the skills you need for colour blending and mixing. We'll run through the basics of oil kind of mediums. We'll be touching a little bit on colour contrast, which is essentially value, working with lights and darks and all the midtones and shades you have in between. And then we won't worry too much about working from observation. So I have done still life with you in the past. If you've seen Art Life, every week you would have found our video of how to paint a kind of classical still life with a kind of shadow box, very Italian atelier learning of how to paint a still life. I always begin with fruit, with a pear, because pears are quite wonky anyway, and you can't really worry too much about making the perfect pear because there's no such thing. So we've done this little still life in one of the episodes on Our Life. Do check that out if you haven't seen it already. So I thought, rather than working from, if you have a pear handy, definitely work from that, but it's quite helpful to work from a 2D image, because when you're working from a 3D image you're so distracted by depth perception. So we're going to remove that in this lesson. This is literally just a beginner's oil painting lesson, and we are going to teach you how to make this in a couple of easy steps. Very straightforward, I promise you. I know it feels slightly intimidating, but by the end of this lesson you should pretty much have something that looks like this, which would be very exciting to hang in your house or give to someone as a gift. So let's get started. Okay, so everything you're going to need, and this is really basic stuff now, we're going to be working with a limited classical palette. So if you're normally working with far too many colours and you find colour very distracting, this lesson's going to be great for you, because we're going to remove half of that kind of, what colour do I choose? And basically you're going to have 4 colours to make this painting. You're going to have cobalt blue, titanium white, Naples yellow, and ivory black. So these colours are pretty universal, although Michael Harding do a very good kind of Naples yellow. It might be yellow ochre if you're using another brand. Basically, essentially, you want it quite an orangey, rich, earthy yellow, not a bright cadmium yellow. So that's everything you'll need. And we can use a little bit of a warmer brown for the stalk of the pear at the end, if you have it and you want it, or if you've got a red. But really we should only need 4 colours to make an entire painting, because from these 4 colours we can basically make lots of nuanced shade of light and shadow. The ivory black will only be for the background. We won't really be using too much of that for the pear, but keeping the colour palette simple is going to really help you to only focus on the mixing. So we'll start there. You'll need about 3 or 4 brushes, a blending brush, and a colour black will probably have its own paintbrush, a black paintbrush for your ivory black, a paintbrush for your greens, and maybe another paintbrush for your highlights. So really we're going to be working to make sure we separate all of our brushes from our tones. So if we're working with black on this brush, we don't want to be working with green and the highlights for the pear with the same brush, unless you clean it in between, which is really irritating, and we don't want to do that. You want to keep everything separate to keep it just as straightforward as possible. So you designate brushes for different colours and different shades. You'll also need a palette knife for mixing, a palette if you've got a tearaway palette, a wooden palette, worst case scenario, a little bit of MDF board if you haven't got anything at home. Just something with a strong surface so you can mix your paint, scoop up your paint on your palette knife, slap it down. A little bit like a builder mixing cement, we want your palette knife to be really mixing the paint without with confidence. So a nice strong surface for that. And we don't need to worry about turpentine or anything. This is a very simple painting we're going to be doing it in quite thin layers, so it shouldn't have too much build up. You'll need a kind of loosening agent, which will be a linseed oil. I'm going to be working with the Miracle Medium, the oil paint medium from Michael Harding, which is a brand new product. It's plant-based, so I've switched from my traditional linseed oils to the Michael Harding Miracle Medium range, but there's a episode next week where I go into more detail about that, and I've also done a kind of initial episode talking about that if you're interested, but that's another episode. But basically this is what I'm going to be adding to my oil paint to thin it out and loosen it out, because oil paint's sort of fresh from the tube. It's very kind of sticky and stiff. We want to loosen it up and make it a lot more kind of amenable, a lot thinner. There's a method that we're going to be working with today called fat over lean with oil painting. Essentially, it's building in layers, so thin layers at the beginning of your oil painting, and we'll build up to the thicker layers as we go along. And this is really just in the same way that on a cold day, you put your thin layers on first, and then your thicker layers, your jumpers, and then your coat at the end. And that's how you dress yourself. Essentially, this is how we dress a painting. You want your thin layers first, and then we build up to the coat levels of painting. If you put on thick, heavy layers of oil, essentially your thick jumpers and coats, too early on in the kind of process of painting, your work will get so sticky and a bit grey, and it won't be easy to mix. So we want to keep it really simple, just take our time, slow layers, kind of progressing with the painting at our own pace. There is no rush. You can pause this video at any time, come back to it at a later date. You could literally do 20 minutes of this video today and maybe a little bit more next week. There's no rush. It's going to be here for you whenever you need it. We just want to make sure you feel like you can learn this in a comfortable way. If you have any questions, you can always ask and answer. I'll answer them in the comments below, or reach me on Instagram at JessOliverArt. I usually check that every day. So if you're working on this video and you come across something, you know, with the light and shadow or the background that you're a bit confused by, drop me a message and I'll answer it. Okay, so we've got everything. One more thing I will say is, if you are really wanting a sketchbook practice and you want to learn and also take notes about how you're kind of like progressing, as you mix your colours today, take a little bit off your palette and you can put it on a scrap bit of paper and write some notes. You know, if you make a beautiful green with lots of blues with a touch of the Naples yellow and maybe a bit of white, you could literally just say, oh, that's my favourite colour, pop it down on a bit of scrap paper and just write yourself a note. If you're going to be doing this painting over maybe a couple of weeks, you know, we're going to be doing this painting in half an hour, but if you take your time, sometimes a little scrap paper just to remember the exact shade can really help you just to kind of revisit a work and not have to kind of remember exactly what you were painting with. So that's just something I do in my own practice. Okay, one more thing I forgot to say is you'll need a bit of canvas, or, you know, I'm just working on a scrap bit of linen to actually make your painting on, and also a rag, if you have like an old rag, just to keep your brushes clean. I'm thin on rags, but I have a lot of baby wipes because we have a baby, so I'm just going to use some baby wipes. So yeah, that's everything you'll need. Like I say, you can work on any size. You can scale this up or scale it down. I'm just going to use just a bit of scrap just to give you a demo. And you will need a pencil as well, just to sketch in the initial stages of your pear. It doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, every pear will be different. That's why I chose the pear. It's because they all look a bit wonky and wibbly anyway. Okay, let's just... You can also see the power of a frame, like the difference and the kind of professionalism of one to the other. So I think we'll be working from this one. Really, what's really helpful to see is that this was painted in life with a spotlight on, where you have the brightest value, which here is on these value finders are great. This is like the highest value, value 9 almost, where the lightest point of the pear is. And then you're working to value 1, which is 100% black, the darkest colour. So here's our darkest value, here's our lightest, and everything in between is kind of gradiating out. So we want to be really aware that we mix our colours first. We make sure we mix all the values we need from value 1 to value sort of 9, 10. And then because we've mixed everything first, we're just applying the paint. We don't want to be mixing with a paintbrush on the kind of like surface. This is a really basic, kind of slightly formally strict kind of lesson in that we're going to mix the colours first, then apply. And also know that once you have your highlight, you leave that as the lightest point. If you're working with a sort of really bright kind of light colour over here, you know that something's wrong. So if you can keep an eye out on your kind of observation of light and dark, that would be really good as we progress in this lesson. Once we have that highlight, we'll basically, from there, that will be darker gradients of kind of green for the rest of the pear. Okay, so this isn't one of my drawing lessons, which I will be doing down the line with Art Life. So I'll give you a little bit of time, but you don't really need that long. We're just going to sketch in a very basic kind of rough idea of the pear. Does not have to be perfect. All we want to see is the kind of rough outline. And actually you can do extra lines just so, okay, that's the bottom of our pear. We want to do a little circle so we know for that really high value of light where we want that. But this is a 3D kind of like, do a kind of light where we want to know that we want the light to kind of gradient out. You know, do yourself a couple of marks that will help you. So there we go, and then there'll be a little shadow here. That's really all you need. So this isn't a drawing lesson. I just have my rough idea of where my pear is, where my highlight is, where the indent is when the pear goes into its kind of like stalk. And I think the rest we can do in paint. Okay, so mixing. We're gonna get, you don't really need that much paint. So we can have our white, our black, our Naples yellow, and cobalt blue. First of all, we need to create about four gradients of green from these sort of three colours. To start with, just mix your yellow and your blue and see what you've got. Just scooping on the hard edge of the palette knife, all of your paint, pushing it back in. This mixes colour much more efficiently than with a brush. And what we want to do is create enough colours that we don't need to use the original colours. We're creating our own palette. Okay, so there's a lovely green there. It probably sits at this value here, value 3, so we need to make some lighter greens and some darker ones. So I'm mixing up the same amount, equal parts blue and yellow, and it basically makes this very mid olive green. So now we want to lighten that up slightly to make a slightly lighter green. So if we want to lighten it up, we add a little bit more yellow, which is our light tone. The blues are sort of shadowy. So in adding the yellow, it makes it slightly warmer. So what I'll do is I'll save a little bit of this colour so I'll know that that's slightly warmer than that original green. And then I'll get a tiny bit of black, really not much, and I'll add it to create a slightly darker tone. See, I think that's still too similar, so I want to add a little bit more black. Just do it incrementally. There's no need to like rush. This is a really lovely exercise because it's very meditative. It's all about just observation. The colour mixing is a massive part of it. You know, holding that colour there. I think it's still quite light, you know. I think a little bit more black. But just see, I'm doing it so slowly because it just means that I don't overwork the colour and make it too dark too fast. Take your time. I think this will be dark enough. And I can always add more colours later, but for now we're really just needing, yeah, that's nice and dark, 5 or 6 greens. So we'll make now, again, a bit of yellow. You'll notice my habit is to have lighter colours at the top of the palette and I work into the darker colours. So a bit of green, bit of yellow, bit of black, and this is going to be our darkest green here, right at the bottom of the palette. We're not really too fussed about the green being, you know, if you get a pear and you're working from a pear at home and it's maybe slightly more lime, or it's, you know, you have so many different brands of pears and things. That's why working from a 2D image is great, because this is more about mixing, applying paint, blending. These are the basics of beginning with oil. We can get more into kind of working from 2D objects and actually accuracy of colour matching to the actual fruit, like much later on. This is really just keeping it really simple for you guys. So yeah, we've got some lovely gradients now. I think if we compare this green to the black, I think there is still room to make a slightly darker green. Mix as many as you like, because you'll use them all, and if you don't use them, it's not the end of the world. Just notice how as well I keep my palette knife quite clean. Just when I take from the yellow, I don't want to contaminate the yellow. Okay, so there's our really dark colour. So we're moving up the spectrum. I think we actually need some lighter greens now. So what I'll do over here, start mixing with the yellow and the cobalt. I'll get a little bit of white, which makes, I think, the green quite grey. So you need lots of yellow with the white to counteract that kind of, because the blue and the white together will want to make a lovely sky blue, so you need a lot of yellow just to kind of tone that down. But notice how much greyer that is because of the white. So there's a lot more yellow in this green than I thought originally, but that's okay. So we've got a slightly, okay, now that's too yellow. See, do you see how this is just constantly backwards and forwards? This is when that piece of scrap paper gets really helpful, so you can just remember your exact recipes for certain colours that you love. Okay, so we've got 6 greens. I think that's enough to be getting on with. Again, this is quite a relaxed exercise. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's slightly different from this pear colour here, in just that I think the blue might have been a slightly different blue. But again, doesn't really matter. This is more about like understanding value of colour, shadow and light, because this is the beginner painting lesson. So no pressure to have it absolutely perfect. This is just the kind of greens I quite like. Okay, so I've got my brushes. I'm going to choose a brush for my dark tones, my mid tones and my highlights, and then colour for the black, colour for blending. So I don't want these brushes to, I don't want to be working with one brush on my black and the same with my light greens, because then everything will go quite samey and flat. We want to keep the kind of energy of the gradient and the kind of contrast of the pear quite bright, quite fun. I'm not going to overwork it. It's just going to be a 1-layer painting really. So we're probably ready to start. You notice that the stalk will be something we do at the end, so don't worry too much about the stalk just yet. So you've mixed your colour, you've got your linseed oil or your miracle medium or your loosening colour. I will start with the mid-tones and then I'll add in the highlights and then go to the dark shadows. I bet I just work, when I'm working on white canvas, I always start with a mid-tone. Some people might like to prime their white surface with some raw umber, which is the traditional way to make everything mid-tone to start with. Working from a mid-tone is always better because it really helps your eye catch light and dark highlights much more quickly and effectively. So here I'm getting my mid-tone, a little bit of linseed oil just to thin that paint out. What we're going to be also paying attention to is that I don't want to paint in straight lines because a pear isn't straight. So all of the paint marks I'm going to be doing are following the curves of a pear. So I'll be following the image that is made here, but it's basically keep your brush strokes curvy and soft. You don't want to be painting kind of in lines. You want to be following the line of the kind of surface that you're painting on. So yeah, don't be afraid. The first few marks always look a bit too dark or too strong, but we can soften everything. So basically you just want to get a few mid-tones in, just so you're starting to like eliminate some of the white. Now already I can feel that that's probably a little bit too dark, but we can lighten it up. It's easy to lighten up a colour. It's harder to work from later on. So in these early stages, don't worry too much. What I'll probably do, if that was my lighter tone and I've started using it, or you're starting working with a colour that you thought was going to be your like light green and it's actually too dark, take a little bit of it from the palette, move it somewhere, and then add a little bit of white. So I'm going to just take a bit of that lighter colour and just put a few brush strokes. Again, be very careful with the white because it can make it feel quite grey, but I just wanted to like pick some colours which I feel like everyone has at home. I'd probably choose like a lighter yellow as well if I was doing this kind of like next level and intermediate level. We'd do different shades of yellow for the kind of nuance of colour, but for now it really doesn't matter. It's just about you getting kind of comfortable blending. So yeah, and then notice it's just following the curve of that pear. And we're going to be, don't worry if it feels quite blobby, because when we sort of blend with our blending brush, everything will become a bit more smoky. So for now, you can just apply quite impressionist style. I might go now different brush. So that's my mid-tone brush, slightly darker brush, just for some darker tones. So I'll choose my slightly darker green here. Notice like the shadow, it feels quite shocking, you know, but we need to have shadow. Also, don't use too much linseed oil because it makes it too runny. So you'll get a feel for like, if the paint starts dribbling down, all you need to do, if that's what's starting to happen, get your rag and just dry your brush off a bit and go back into the colour. But like, again, I'm not doing any straight lines. Everything is sort of following the curve of the pear. Keep the brush quite dry. So again, this is just the initial layer. I'm just sketching in roughly the greens. Again, it's so helpful that we made a bunch of colours, so I'm really just focusing now on applying the paint. And then keeping the brush quite dry. Notice I don't want too much paint on the brush. Again, I think a slightly darker tone when we add the background as well, the background is very important. Don't do this and not do the background. We need that really black background to give us a sense of depth. I think when we put it in a minute, you'll really see the kind of how it impacts the highlights and the sense of kind of classicism. Like these are very like, I don't know, almost traditional ways of doing landscapes. These are very traditional ways of doing still life with a black background. Okay, so I'll go back to my mid-tone brush. I think I need to blend in a minute, because you see how fast you can fill an entire surface. I forgot to do my slightly brown bottom of the pear, so all I'll do here is just a gesture, like a little shadow. It doesn't need to be perfect with your dark green, just to imply where the bottom is. Again, we can define it later. We can leave it to dry and then come back to it another day. But it's just so we know that not to go over that bit with a bright light colour. That's our dark bottom. It can actually probably be a bit darker. Often seeing colours sit next to each other really helps you understand where you need to take a painting. Right, so I've added I want a bit more yellow for going in towards the highlight, just for a sense of warmth, I think. Okay, so at this point we're going to start doing the highlights in earnest. I'm finding actually that the Naples yellow and the white and the blue make a bit of a grey. I do have a slightly brighter Naples yellow, which I'm just going to use. If you guys have got a kind of, you see the difference in yellow, slightly less orange. There's a lot of red in this Naples yellow, which is why I thought it would be a good one for the kind of bulk of it. I'm just going to add a little bit of it just to try. Well, maybe quite a lot of it, yellow. Just to see how, if I can make a slightly more like brighter green. I'm actually going to mix it from one of the colours I've already made. Like, I don't need to keep making fresh greens from blue and yellow. I've made green. Like, let me add just the bright yellow to that green and see what happens. I think that's slightly better than white, you know. I think that makes it lighter, but without... Do you see the difference between what happens when I add white, it goes grey, and what happens when I add that more kind of fun yellow? I think I might use the fun yellow instead of white. I'm going to be really rogue, and maybe just use a white for a dot highlight. But that's okay. We can do that. That's no problem. So let's just see now. Yeah, it already feels a bit warmer. Let me just. Yeah, just slightly less kind of flat. Great. I'm going to add in now that really light value. Remember, we spoke about at the beginning, we wanted to create the lightest point of our piece of fruit, and then we wouldn't go lighter than that. So here I'm making sure I'm putting my highlight in basically with just sort of pure white with a bit of that yellow. And I won't be going now any lighter for the whole painting. If anything starts to match that lightness over here or anywhere, I'll know that it's wrong. So yeah, this is my lightest point of the painting now. Everywhere from here gets darker. Okay, so have we, this is the little bit I haven't done here. This is my light brush. I almost started going over dark bits with my light brush. Try and keep them separate, even I have to tell myself. So when you've got to this stage, where you've sort of covered everything of that kind of pear itself, my bottom of the pear, my light bit, my mid-tones, you've kind of observed how I haven't made any marks that are longer than that. Everything's been quite kind of choppy, following the curves. There's been no straight lines. Well, maybe just one here, but that follows the circle. And don't worry if it looks a bit blodgy, because now we're going to blend it, and then we're going to start adding in the background, and then we'll revisit the pear. So the idea is you do a little bit of this, a little bit of background, and then you go back to the pear, and you just keep kind of doing little bits of it, just so you don't overwork something. Sometimes you need a bit of a break. So I'm just going to get a blending brush. I mean, you can have two blending brushes if you like. Blending brushes with oil are great because they soften the harsh lines. You see how blocky this is? I'm just, again, in the brush strokes of, this blending brush might be too big, you know, following the lines. Oh, yeah, I think that's too big. Let's get a smaller blending brush. That's what I mean. If you're trying something and it doesn't work for you, change it up. It doesn't, this is a work in progress. I'm doing it as a, you know, okay, this blending brush is actually quite hard and it's actually taken off paint. So tells me that I need to do an episode where I clean more brushes. Let's try this one. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. So that paintbrush took off paint. So all I do is put it back on. With oil, it's taking off paint, applying it, putting it back on. With one of my mid-tone greens here. That's what I mean. And you might find as well, you get a bit of paint somewhere where it shouldn't be and you like freak out because it now feels like it's ruined. Nothing is ever ruined with oil. We can always fix it. You just remove and reapply, which is essentially what I'm doing here. Removing and reapplying. So yeah, we just need a bit more paint. Okay, how are we doing? Okay, so we've kind of is that back to where we were? Okay, so back to the blending. Again, have your rag or your bit of paper or towel and just make sure your brush is really dry. And we're going to again blend it slightly. Dry it just to kind of soften some of the brush strokes. Just really, again, all we're doing is just like softening some of those harsher with a clean brush. Do I have like a... I've never done a demo before. Let's try. Maybe a flat blending brush might suit my style better. It's like makeup brushes, blending brushes. Half of oil painting is finding the right blending brush. Here we go. Okay, so now okay, this is better. This is working for me better. I just needed to find the right brush. Again, following the direction of the fruit. We're going to reapply darker shadows in a minute, but I'm just softening those initial marks that I made. Remember that looking at something closely and standing back from it will also change how you see it. Okay. So blending it is going to make it feel a bit flatter, but what you've done is you've kind of created your base layer, and now I'm just going to reapply some of the kind of like highlights again, so you kind of reintroduce the colour once more. Bearing in mind, you probably just saw I was having a bit of a crisis with finding the right blending brush. This one was too big, this one was a bit hard and not blending it softly. You might only have one blending brush in your collection. You might have just ordered a like basic kit. That's fine. I have the luxury of lots of different brushes to try and figure out the right one for me, which happened to be quite a flat brush, just for detail work. And that's just how I paint. I tend to kind of like find bigger brushes make me feel a bit cat-handed. Can I say cat-handed on YouTube? Is that bad language? Okay. So yeah, so I'm liking where it's going. You can see it's all very soft. It's soft now. I'm going to keep my blending brushes over here separate. But I need some more highlights, so I'm going to revisit this again. I'm going to just get my light, I'm going to put my highlight back in, put a few more midtones, and then we'll start on the background. So again, I feel like I've made that light highlight a bit too soft. I just want a little, almost like a dot, just to make sure I know that beam of light hitting that pear. Again, it would be amazing if we did this in the flesh, and do go watch that episode I did on how to paint a still life, because I do it from flesh with a plumb line and the shadow box and all the kit. So that's quite a fun one. Again, mixing. Halfway through the painting, it's quite nice to go back to the mixing board and just mix a few more colours. You can see the difference when you add a slightly different yellow to the blue. What happens now? It's made like a kind of acrid green, which is way too fake. So I might tone that down with a bit of my Naples yellow. It's amazing how like one tiny bit of paint just takes over a colour. You think you can't make the right colour, and then it just needs a tiny bit of blue, and then bam, you're away. Take your time with the mixing though, because I think you learn a lot about tonal value just by making sure you like recognise where a colour sits on the light and shadow spectrum. That's almost like a lemon yellow. That's okay, we can work with that. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is not about making the perfect pear. This is about you feeling confident in this process of mixing and blending. Okay, so we want to now start to put in the details of the bottom of the pear. Just to define you in sort of 4 blobs around the base. That base is probably a bit light. I could probably make that a bit darker. Yeah, I probably need to make it slightly darker now. I just used my light brush in a dark colour. You'll probably do that as well. And even if you've got a cup of tea, you might put your brush in your cup of tea rather than the linseed oil. If that happens, don't worry, just clean your brush, or if you have loads, get another one. And now this has become a dark brush, that's fine. It's when you get super in the zone, you stop paying attention. But I am not a perfect teacher. I'm just here to make you feel confident about trying something different with oil. So you can see how we've got some nice dark shadows here, just again following that pear. Get the mixing brush again, just soften the edges. So I think what I'm finding now is that without the background, I'm getting a bit confused about where the gradient of light is. We need the background to give us some perspective. So we want a brand new brush because black will take over everything. So I'm going to get a brand new brush straight into the black paint. And the first thing I'm going to do is go around the edge of the pear. Make sure you don't have, like, can you see how this is too thin and it looks a bit too watery? We don't want it to be too watery and dribble because black goes everywhere and takes over. If you're like me, I need to invest in some new brushes. Some of my brushes have got like bristles and they don't feel like they give me a clean line. That's fine. This is just a test practicing with oil. Don't be too precious about it. But I'm just going to carefully go around the pear because I think this is going to help me a little bit more understand where I'm going wrong with the shadows. Already I can feel how the pear is way too like mid-tone light. I need to introduce some darker shadows because you know it's going into the black. It's going to merge into the background. But I couldn't be brave and see that while I wasn't working with the background. So again, don't worry about the stalk. We'll do that at the very end. Take your time. Just take your time going on the edge. Doesn't have to be perfect. All pears are wobbly anyway. Again, this is a very classical idea of a pear. It's no Cézanne, but it's just about learning about contrast. Yeah, you can totally see how it's way too light. What I'm going to do now as well is just stretch out that black background. The background is really important as the pear. We want to make sure that we have that background in because it helps us get the perspective and depth right. So just slap on a bit more black. Now you've done your edge, you can be a bit more, we want a rough square. If we have more time, we could fill the whole white canvas. But for now, we're just going to create a general square. Ivory black's a beautiful colour for this as well, because we can add a little bit of white in a moment just to give it, lighten it up a little bit, because this is very dark. This is the darkest colour I have in my collection. But that, do you see how the frame of the black really helps you see, hone in? The white was really distracting. Suddenly now we've got a bit more of that light value of white helps us see where we're going wrong with the dark shadows. Yeah, way too light. I'm doing this on purpose now. Oops! Like I've just ruined my pear. If this happens and your black goes somewhere it shouldn't, don't worry. All we're going to do is take your time, rework the line, get your rag, dry your brush, get more black paint fresh. This will take probably a few days to dry. But don't worry, when black gets in things, all we do is dry brush. We go back into it, and when I go back into the green, so look, I'm really making it like obviously like my black's gone way too into the pear. What I'll do is then I'll get my green again. Is this helpful to show them if they do it wrong? Yeah, okay. Get my nice green again, my mid-tone green, and I just then push back against the black like that. Dry brush, keep drying your brush. Fresh brush every brush stroke when you're working like this intensely. Dry brush, mid-tone. And you see how suddenly we've reclaimed the pear? It was the black. There we go. So that's all you do. And then we can blend that in. So if the black goes somewhere it shouldn't, don't worry. Dry brush, mid-tone green. After you've, it's like you push back. It's kind of like the kind of boundary of the fruit's gonna like be at your pleasure to kind of, at your discretion to decide where you want your pear to go, how big or small. So now I can see that I need a really nice dark green, one of my darker spectrum greens. Just having the backgrounds helped me see that I was being too timid with my midtones. So if you can, let me just show you what I mean. So we want a much darker green. Even that one's almost not too dark. Using a little bit of your black now with your green. Again, it might be quite wet at this stage and you might need to let it dry for a day or two and go back to it. But for the sake of just like showing you how I'm going to work through the tones. Do you see how just reintroducing this slightly darker green, bringing in the black of the background to the green I've made, suddenly gives it more, oh yeah, no, I can totally see it, yeah. I was being way too like flat. Well, you want it to have contrast. Yeah, it was not, yeah, and that's all it is. The background really gives you a sense of like, oh yeah, I was being way too timid. Because we've mixed all these colours ahead of time, it's really straightforward just to introduce some of those darker colours now. And remember, this will look much better from a distance. Up close it might look a bit weird, but again I'll blend it in a second so it feels like it is a fruit. Again, following the lines of the pear, I'm not doing any marks which are really rigid, keep it quite fluid. I'm noticing actually I need a little detail, so I'm going to get my black background brush with the black on it, and I'm just going to, again, it's quite wet. When it gets this wet, you might be quite frustrated because you're like, it doesn't work as well. I just want a few slightly darker marks in that bottom. Just to break it up a bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. With that background brush as well, with the ivory black, I'm just going to add a little bit of white to make a grey, titanium white and ivory grey. And the black's actually feeling a bit too flat. So what I might do is just with the grey, lighten it up slightly around the shadow, just to give it a bit more sense of 3D. That's what we want. We want this to feel fun and 3D. Doesn't have to be perfect. See how my brush strokes are quite kind of sloppy? That's only more fun, I think. Make it look a bit more natural. But yeah, just introducing that grey slightly as well just gives it some more depth. Titanium white and black is quite good. Grey, really. But now the black isn't looking so flat, which is what we want. Okay, so I need to a few more marks, then I need to go back into blending, and then I think we'll do the stalk. I'm just focusing on the colour, so again, I don't want to be making any marks that are too solid. Again, it's getting quite wet. But just to like soften the edges, so any sharp edges you have, just take a moment just to soften them. Makes it feel slightly more natural. And pears are wobbly, so if your brush strokes are feeling wobbly, that's okay. Have a wobbly pear. It's more fun. Let me just step back from it really. So I ruined my mid-tone brush, so I need a fresh brush for my mid-tone. And now I'm just going to put in a few more marks of that lovely original green we made. Just because I want it to feel a bit more bumpy. So I'm just going to do a few blobby marks. I want to imply that, you know, quite a bulbous surface of the flesh of the pear. Because you can blend it all out and it feels too flat. Keep those marks quite fun. My darker mid-tone green. Again, we haven't touched that highlight. That's been a really helpful kind of reminder of like to make sure to keep it light there. I've kind of stayed away from the edges of black because it's very wet, and I don't really want to. You'll make mistakes if you kind of like start to get too close to the edge when it's this wet. Let it dry for a day or two if you want to keep working into it. Again, I'm now just applying little bits of paint, blending it in with my blending brush, keeping that blending brush quite dry. Again, just like a clean brush just feels like you're then not picking up paint and putting it where it shouldn't be. Again, don't worry too much if you scoop up black from the edge. Just push it back. I think let's do the stalk because I think the stalk will also give us a bit more of a sense of. So clean brush, Naples yellow. If you have a red, a little bit of red would be all right. I know I said you only need 4 colours to make this pear. I'm actually using like 5. I've got a Venetian red or an English red, which is basically like brown. I might just, okay. You could literally just use black and Naples yellow if you wanted. I'll show you what that colour looks like just in case you do literally have Naples yellow and black. So Naples yellow and black, just going to blend it. It's going to make a grey. That's perfectly, sorry, I've got too many colours on here now, you probably can't see. That's perfectly fine if you just want to use like a kind of like yellowy grey. I might add a little bit of like a red to that, just to warm it up slightly for the idea of a kind of like barky stalk. If you've got a brown, just use the brown. Again, very dark colour. We don't want a light colour. I'm going to get a brush. I'm just going to do a line, clean my brush. Again, the black is very wet, so I'm just going to do a line and then blend it into the black slightly, and then I'm going to leave it. It's just a gesture. Keep your brush quite clean. Just blending that original brownie line in to the black. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to overwork it. It's just a suggestion. That's why you can use your grey if you want. It's just so you break up the... Oh, now the light's a bit better in here. I can see a bit more. So yeah, you can work back into your black. You can start fiddling now. If you've done like the basic stages, you can fill more of the canvas in. You can make it all completely black, or you might quite like the rough edge. This might just be a bit of a sketchbook study just for you practicing oil. I think that bottom of the pear is still a little bit too light, you know. Okay, so now I've nearly finished this sort of experiment. I can see that I just need slightly darker bottom. And also that triangle does help me get a sense of the base. Probably, again, now that this light, I've got sunlight streaming in now and I can suddenly see the painting a bit better. Again, I still think it's too light. I think I need to darken up those shadows. slightly. Yeah, I might have to move this, the sun's. Might let this dry for a bit now because it's very wet. It's hard to blend after it's this wet. Okay, so final touches. It's very wet now, so I'm not really making any more progress. I think if I went back to it, I'd reintroduce more shadow. But for now, I think I've got a sense of like where the light is. I followed the kind of curvature of the fruit. Yeah, I think working with good brushes helps, but I did the best I could with what I had. Like, I think it was quite a fun exercise, really. Like, I think the mid-tone green, making the perfect green, it was worth spending the time doing that. And avoiding the white actually has been really helpful, working with a yellow instead of white. So it's felt quite sort of fresh. Okay, so last thing I'm going to do is make a sort of quite a dark grey with the ivory black and a little bit of white. And I just want to imply that there's a bit of a shadow for this pear because it'll give it a bit more gravity. So it's not just too flat. We started doing a little bit of this, but just because we've worked with shadow, so I think it would look too strange if we don't put a shadow in. So just, doesn't have to be perfect, but just do a little shadow underneath the pear. Hopefully this feels quite loose, but just to imply where, if we were working from life, the actual shadow of the pear would be. I think that already gives it a bit more sense of depth, which is what we're going to look for with this. The background is as important. I think already that looks better already. And take your time with the black background. These final touches really do offset the pear. I'm happy with that. Okay, so yeah, I think looking at this, I'm really pleased with how this has gone. We've got a nice sense of light, of contrast. We've been playing with oil, so we have a real feel of mixing. Hopefully also you have loved how many colours you've made from literally blue and yellow. You can kind of make a classical painting. The black, I love how that black, that really dark scale of the value just made it feel like it came alive. We have got a lovely range of spectrum with the midtones. I think if you've done anything, you know, towards something like this, you hopefully feel like you've got a bit more of an understanding of just kind of light and dark kind of shades and how they impact oil, and depth perception, like you see the little bit at the end of the shadow under the pear, suddenly makes it feel like it's a bit more realistic. There's so many different ways you can paint, you know, anything. You know, this is quite a traditional sort of method, but I think it's quite good to start with traditional kind of classical painting styles, because when you have a good foundation of oil painting, you can then feel more confident, build your confidence to explore with your style. So this might not be your style, but it's a really good exercise. Maybe you haven't painted for a while and you just want to get back into it. Something like this is a great way to start. So really happy with that. I think when it dries, what I'll do, I might maybe work into the shadows and make them a bit darker. I really realised when I did the background how I was being way too timid with my dark greens, and I loved the light greens too much. So hopefully that's taught you as well. Me making mistakes, that if you're making mistakes and it doesn't look quite how you pictured it, absolutely fine. As soon as it's dry, go back into it, play a little bit more. I think leave some of the brush strokes as well. Don't kind of smoke too much of it out, because it's a painting, it's not a photograph. You want to allow it to be a painting. And then I think, you know, if you framed something like that at the end, it could be quite a little fun thing to just hang on the wall at home or stick on the fridge. Just, yeah, be proud you did it if you did it. Thank you very much. Please do leave a comment or send me a photo on Instagram at Jess Oliver Art to show me how it's gone for you. If you've got any comments, questions, do let me know, because I love to kind of like work with you guys. We've got such a nice community now of artists working together. Because if you're like me painting alone in your studio, it can get quite lonely. So yeah, just get in contact if you feel like you need a bit of a boost in your practice. And I hope this is my first time like teaching like the ABC of how to paint. I hope it came across okay. But if there's anything else you'd have liked me to go into more detail about, again, let me know and I can like tweak how I like do these videos, because this is embarking on a new style of art life with like, you know, skill sharing. So yeah, do like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. If you managed to watch all the way to the end as well, however long it took you, really appreciate it. Okay, so I'll see you next time. Have a great day, guys. Bye.